Every year, millions of people watch Narcos and come away feeling like they understand the cartel world. The glamour, the power, the danger, all of it packaged into something watchable, something you can stream from your couch while the credits roll and the narco corridos play. But the show was built around men. The women in it exist to decorate the story, mourn the dead, or die themselves so someone else's plot can move forward. The actual documented record of what the cartel world does to women is something the show never came close to touching. Not the women who literally died trying to look the part. Not the ones who ran entire distribution networks and had their names erased. Not the ones thrown off bridges at 4 years old. Not the journalists shot 8 times in front of their children. Not the 3,754 women murdered in Mexico in a single year, 10 every single day, in the same territories the show spent 3 seasons glamorizing. This is what Narcos didn't show you. Section 1. The bucona trap. The glamour that kills you. Narcos shows you the clothes, the cars, the parties, the beautiful women draped across expensive furniture in houses the size of small hotels. The show made the cartel world look like a life worth wanting, and it did that job so well that millions of people around the world watched it and felt something close to envy. The reality sitting behind that image is this. In the state of Sinaloa, where the most powerful drug cartel in the world was born and still operates, women die trying to look the part. Paulina Ramirez Garcia was 25 years old when she walked into a clinic on the outskirts of Culiacan. She was not there because she was sick. She wanted a smaller stomach, wider hips, and a bigger backside, what is known locally as the bucona body. The person who performed her procedure was not a plastic surgeon. She was a general practitioner with 6 hours of training in cosmetic treatments, operating out of a plain white building on the side of a road with no signage and no proper medical equipment. The surgeon perforated Paulina's internal organs 6 times. Her colon, ovaries, and intestines were all damaged. Paulina spent 3 weeks in hospital on a ventilator before dying on March 9, 2022. The doctor was arrested on murder charges, released on bail, and her charges were reduced to manslaughter. Paulina's grandmother, Dolores Garcia, 72 years old, keeps photos of her granddaughter arranged around a candle in a shrine in their 1-story home in El Dorado, about an hour outside Culiacan. A certified plastic surgeon named Rafaela Martinez Terrazas, who has worked in Culiacan for nearly 2 decades, described Paulina's death as the tip of the iceberg. She told Vice World News she regularly treats women with infections and complications from illegal clinics across Sinaloa. The government does not track deaths from illegal plastic surgery. The clinic where Paulina died did not appear on any official list. It was one of hundreds. The word bucona has been used in Sinaloa for decades. It originally referred to the girlfriends and wives of drug traffickers. It comes from buche, the part of a bird's body where food is stored before digestion, which makes the bird appear bloated and enlarged. Applied to women in narco culture, it describes a specific physical ideal. Large breasts, a large backside, a dramatically narrow waist, long dark hair, heavy makeup, designer clothes, and visible evidence of surgery. The point is not to appear natural. Showing you have had surgery signals that someone had money to pay for it, and in Sinaloa, that means a connection to the cartel world. The most visible buchona in the world is Emma Coronel Aispuro, wife of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. She married El Chapo in 2007 when she was 17 and he was in his 50s. She sat through his entire 2018 to 2019 trial in New York without flinching. She appeared on VH1's Cartel Crew, sipping champagne on yachts. She launched a clothing line. She was arrested at Dulles International Airport in February 2021, pled guilty to drug trafficking and money laundering, served 36 months, and was released in 2023. Throughout all of it, She had millions of social media followers and became the most famous cartel woman on the planet, a role model for young women across northern Mexico in a way no legitimate public figure had managed. One TikTok video under the bucona hashtag had 1.1 million views when journalists counted it. It showed a photo of Emma Coronel with a gold crown and the words, "My dream is to be like her." Social psychologist Isaac Tomas Guevara Martinez, who studies violence in Sinaloa State, told journalists that many women in Sinaloa dream of marrying drug traffickers because they want a luxurious lifestyle, and that Emma Coronel is their role model. Maria Teresa Guerra, a lawyer who has spent decades working on women's rights cases in Sinaloa, described the culture plainly. Narco culture has created the idea that women are property owned by men, and that idea directly increases violence against women, whether from a narco lover, his enemies, or anyone who decides that a connection to a cartel makes a woman fair game. The data is straightforward. In Sinaloa, twice as many women are killed using firearms than in any other state in Mexico. Not twice as many murders per capita, twice as many firearms killings. When a woman is killed in Sinaloa with a known connection to the narco world, authorities frequently treat her death as a consequence of her own choices. Guerra described it directly. Police use that connection to explain away the murder without investigating it. The word built to describe an aspirational lifestyle becomes, after a woman is dead, the reason the state decides her death is not worth solving. A young woman identified only as Carmen in Vice World News reporting described her situation directly. A narco godfather was pressuring her to get surgery. She had avoided it so far. She said she had not stopped being frightened of him, that when they met there was talk about the cartel and it scared her, and that he might not want to harm her, but could have her disappeared whether he meant to or not. That sentence carries more information about the reality of the bucona life than anything Narcos ever put on screen. The next section moves from what women chase to what happens to the women who were already inside the cartel world from birth, the ones who had no choice about the life they were entering, and what that life does to them. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next section moves to the women who tried to take power inside these organizations for themselves, what they actually achieved, what happened to them when they did, and why the show never found a way to tell those stories accurately. Section 2. Women are literally dying for the narco body. Paulina Ramirez Garcia grew up in El Dorado, a small city about an hour outside Culiacan. She was 25 years old in February 2022. She went to a clinic on the outskirts of Culiacan for what was described as a mini liposuction, a procedure to remove fat from her stomach and inject it into her hips and backside. The clinic had no name sign outside. It was a plain white building on the side of a road. Nothing about it looked like a medical facility. The person who performed the procedure was not a plastic surgeon. She was a general practitioner with 6 hours of training in cosmetic treatments. During the operation, she perforated Paulina's internal organs 6 times. Her colon, ovaries, and intestines were all damaged. Paulina spent 22 days in hospital, mostly on a ventilator. The skin on her abdomen rotted away completely. Vice World News journalists saw photos confirming this. She died on March 9, 2022. The woman who performed the surgery was arrested on homicide charges. She never visited Paulina once during those 22 days in hospital. Her charges were later downgraded to manslaughter, and she was released on bail pending a trial. Paulina's grandmother, Dolores Garcia, 72 years old, keeps a candle burning in front of photos of her granddaughter at home. Paulina is not the only case. In the same year, a 29-year-old woman named Magnolia Camacho died in Mexico after undergoing more than 30 surgeries in 6 months following a gastric band procedure. France 24 documented this alongside Paulina's case when reporting on the illegal surgery industry in Sinaloa. Dr. Rafaela Martinez Terrazas, a certified plastic surgeon who has worked in Culiacan for close to 2 decades, told journalists at Vice World News that Paulina's death was the tip of the iceberg. She said she regularly treats women arriving at her clinic with infected wounds and complications from procedures done at illegal facilities. She said there is no way of knowing how many women have died this way because the Mexican government keeps no official count of deaths caused by illegal cosmetic surgery complications. To understand why women are putting themselves through this, you have to understand the economy behind it. A proper liposuction and fat transfer procedure at a legitimate clinic in Culiacan costs around $6,500, according to Dr. Martinez Terrazas. That is far beyond what most women in Sinaloa can afford. Some get the procedure paid for by a narco. Some use a system called a condena, a group savings arrangement where women pool money monthly and take turns receiving surgery, aimed specifically at the cheaper, unlicensed clinics. The BBC reported on this system directly after interviewing women in Culiacan. One man who spoke to the BBC, identified only as Pedro because he did not want to be named, described how the arrangement works from the narco side. He said he moves in drug trafficking circles in Sinaloa and described himself as a personal trainer. He had paid for plastic surgery for 2 women. He explained that for narcos, having a beautiful woman at his side is like a prototype, something every narco wants. He said men compete with each other for women. He described wives as women who stay home and raise children, while the other women a narco keeps are more like trophies. He said men are motivated by lust and that the surgeries cater directly to that. Dr. Martinez Terrazas confirmed what Pedro described. One man had sent approximately 30 women to her clinic for surgery, paying in cash. She said the money obviously came from drug trafficking. She said she used to think it was wrong, and now she thinks about it less, because the entire economy of Sinaloa, hospitals, restaurants, bars, runs on cartel money. When a narco pays for a woman's surgery, Martinez told journalists, she always takes the woman aside privately and asks if she is comfortable with what is about to happen. Sometimes they tell her, whatever he wants. She tells those women that the man will eventually leave, but their body will be theirs for the rest of their lives. A woman identified only as Gabriela in BBC reporting, a 38-year-old business owner and single mother in Sinaloa, described what relationships with narcos actually look like from the inside. She said it is very normal for a man in that world to have 3 or 4 women alongside a wife. She said women tolerate it because they are being supported financially. She described it plainly: eyes that do not see, a heart that does not feel. Another young woman, identified as Carmen in the same BBC report, had a narco godfather pressuring her to get surgery. She had avoided it so far. She told journalists she had not stopped being frightened of him. When they met, she said, there was talk about the mafia, about business, and it scared her. She said she tried to forget what she heard and saw because knowing things could cause problems. She said he might not want to harm her, but he could have her disappeared whether he intended to or not. That last part is what separates this from an ordinary story about beauty standards. Carmen was not describing a difficult relationship. She was describing a situation where leaving or refusing could make her disappear. Maria Teresa Guerra, a lawyer who has spent decades working on women's rights cases in Sinaloa, told journalists directly that narco culture has created the idea that women are property owned by men. She said this increases violence against women from every direction, from a lover who feels betrayed, from cartel enemies who target women to send messages, and from a legal system that treats a woman's narco connections as a reason her death is less worth investigating. After Paulina's death, Sinaloa's state health agency closed 24 unregistered clinics in a single inspection round. At that point, 233 clinics had registered with the agency, and registration had only just started being required. The true number of operating clinics was never determined, because the ones most likely to kill someone are the ones that never register with anyone and operate without any paper trail. The government of Mexico does not count how many women die from illegal plastic surgery. Paulina Ramirez Garcia's death is documented. The full number of women who died the same way is not.
Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The story of what happened to Paulina covers only women who were chasing the narco world from the outside. What happened to the women who were already inside it, married to cartel figures, born into cartel families, is a different story entirely. And it starts with a woman whose fate Narcos put on screen and still managed to understate. Section 3. The real story of Guadalupe Lea Serrano. What Narcos left out. Narcos. Mexico put Guadalupe Lea Serrano on screen. Actress Viviana Serna played her across 2 seasons. The show depicted her murder. It showed her husband Hector Palma Salazar, known as El Güero Palma, receiving the news. The audience understood it was brutal. Then the episode moved on. What the show did not do was stay with what actually happened to her, or explain what her story tells you about the position every woman in that world actually occupies. Here is what is documented. Hector Palma Salazar was a founding leader of the Sinaloa cartel alongside Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. He was born in Mocorito, Sinaloa in 1960 and started as a car thief before working his way into the Guadalajara cartel under Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, the man known as the godfather of the Mexican drug trade. Palma eventually broke from Félix Gallardo's organization and built his own operation in Sinaloa. He was a serious cartel figure with serious enemies. In 1978, Palma was arrested in Arizona on drug trafficking charges and sentenced to 8 years in a U.S. prison. He served that sentence and was released. When he got out, he discovered that his wife, Guadalupe, had left with another man and taken their 2 children with her. The man she left with was Rafael Enrique Clavel Moreno, a Venezuelan drug trafficker. Clavel had a personal connection to Palma. He had previously been the boyfriend of Palma's sister, Minerva. He was charming, handsome, and already embedded in the same criminal world. Guadalupe left with him. What Guadalupe did not know, what she could not have known, was that Clavel was not a man she had found. He was a weapon that had been pointed at her husband. Clavel was working under Felix Gallardo's instructions to settle a score with Palma. The method Felix Gallardo chose was Guadalupe. Clavel convinced Guadalupe to withdraw $7 million from a bank account belonging to Palma. Then he killed her. He decapitated her. He packaged her severed head and sent it to her husband. He filmed the murders of her children, Jesus, who was 5 years old, and Natalie, who was 4, and included the tape in the same package. The children were taken to Venezuela and thrown off a bridge called Puente de la Concordia, located in the city of San Cristobal, Táchira, about 40 kilometers from the border with Colombia. That is what Guadalupe Lea Serrano's story actually is. She was not a player in cartel politics. She had no power inside the organization. She was married to a man who did, and that marriage was what made her useful as a target. The cartel did not come for her because of anything she had done. It came for her because hurting her was the most efficient way to send a message to her husband. Her value in that calculation was entirely determined by whose wife she was. This is the mechanism the show softened. Narcos depicted the violence, but it moved past it. The real story sits there and demands you look at what it means. Women connected to cartel figures, by marriage, by blood, by geography, are not protected by those connections. They are endangered by them. The connection is not a shield. It is a target painted on them by someone else's choices. Clavel was eventually caught. He was murdered in prison, killed by an inmate on Palma's orders. Palma, for his part, was arrested on June 23, 1995, when his private jet crash-landed on his way to a wedding. He was extradited to the United States, served his sentence, was released in June 2016, deported back to Mexico, and is currently incarcerated at Altiplano Prison near Mexico City on charges related to the murder of 2 Nayarit police officers in 1995. The story of what happened to Guadalupe is not an isolated case of extreme cruelty. It is a documented example of how women function inside the cartel economy. They are assets when alive, status symbols, money conduits, intelligence sources, emotional anchors for men who need to maintain the appearance of a normal life. And when the men around them make enemies, the women become the most accessible point of attack. This is documented not just in Guadalupe's case, but across the history of the Mexican drug war. Wikipedia's article on women in the Mexican drug war, sourced from academic researchers and investigative journalists, states directly that women have been murdered for being the grandmothers, mothers, wives, daughters, nieces, sisters, cousins, co-workers, or friends of persons targeted for assassination. The relationship does not need to be a close one. Being connected at all is enough. Maria Teresa Guerra, the Sinaloa-based lawyer referenced in the previous section, described it this way in interviews with journalists. The narcos send a message that women belong to them. That ownership is the thing that gets women killed, not just from lovers who turn violent, but from enemies who understand that the fastest way to damage a man is through the people closest to him. Guadalupe's children were 5 and 4 years old. They were thrown off a bridge into a river in Venezuela. A tape of it was made and mailed to their father. Narcos showed its audience the cartel world for multiple seasons. It made characters out of the men who built it, broke it apart, and put it back together. Guadalupe Lea Serrano appeared in it briefly, died on screen, and was used as a plot point that propelled her husband's story forward. That in itself is the most accurate thing the show ever did, not because it depicted the violence correctly, but because it handled her the same way the cartel did. As a supporting character in someone else's story, whose death only mattered because of what it meant for the men around her. The next section moves to the women who try to take power inside these organizations for themselves. What they actually achieved, what happened to them when they did, and why the show never found a way to tell those stories accurately. Section 4. The women who actually ran things and were erased. When El Chapo was convicted in a federal court in Brooklyn in February 2019 and sentenced to life in prison, his indictment listed 8 names. 7 were men. 1 was a woman. Her name was Guadalupe Fernandez Valencia. Almost nobody had ever heard of her. That gap between how much power she actually held and how unknown she remained tells you more about how the cartel world works for women than any television show ever could. Guadalupe Fernandez Valencia was born in the state of Michoacán, Mexico. She migrated to California as a young woman and began dealing drugs on the street in the 1990s after she became pregnant. When she told a federal judge in Chicago about her background in 2019, she broke down in tears. She said she had 5 children and that her husband was no good to her. She said she started in factories and ended up in drugs. She was convicted of drug trafficking in California in 1998 and served a 10-year sentence before being deported back to Mexico in 2007. Back in Mexico, she initially tried to stop. Then her brother Manuel, who had started working for the Sinaloa cartel, was arrested in November 2010. Shortly after that, someone came to see her, described in court documents only as Individual B, most likely one of El Chapo's sons or an envoy, and told her she was not safe. She moved to Culiacan in mid-2012. Court documents note it is unclear whether her decision to start trafficking again was actually a choice or an instruction she had no real option to refuse. From that point, she rose. She began moving cocaine, marijuana, and methamphetamine for the Sinaloa cartel. Her established contacts inside the United States, built during her years dealing in California, made her useful in a way that most cartel members were not. She was eventually reporting directly to Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar, known as Alfredio, one of El Chapo's sons. U.S. prosecutors described her in court documents as Alfredio's lieutenant. They said she worked with him on the entire drug distribution process from beginning to end. Between 2009 and 2014, she moved massive quantities of drugs into the United States and laundered the proceeds back to Mexico. ABC7, Chicago, reported that U.S. law enforcement described her as the chief financial officer of the Sinaloa Cartel during El Chapo's time at the top. She was one of his most trusted aides. She was the only woman on the indictment that put him in prison for life. She was arrested in Culiacan in February 2016, 1 month after El Chapo's final capture. She was extradited to the United States in November 2017. In June 2019, she pleaded guilty in Chicago to drug trafficking and money laundering conspiracies. In August 2021, she was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Because of time already served in both Mexico and the United States, plus recognition of what prosecutors called substantial cooperation with U.S. investigators, she had roughly 3 years left to serve at the time of sentencing. The judge, Sharon Johnson Coleman, said the cooperation came at serious risk to Fernandez Valencia's own life and to the lives of her children. The details of what she told investigators were filed under seal and kept from the public. Criminal defense attorney Bonnie Clapper, who has represented multiple high-profile female drug traffickers, described the sentence reduction this way in statements to journalists. The huge reduction was a recognition that Fernandez Valencia had placed herself and her family at great risk by providing substantial assistance against a man some considered the most violent trafficker in the world. None of this made major headlines. Narcos, the show that turned El Chapo's world into global entertainment, never touched her story. The media coverage of El Chapo's trial focused almost entirely on Emma Coronel, his young, surgically altered, photogenic wife who sat in the courtroom in tailored outfits and said nothing. Coronel became the face of cartel women to the entire world. Fernandez Valencia, who had spent over 3 decades in the drug business and was the actual highest-ranking female operative in the organization, was mentioned in a handful of news articles and then largely forgotten. Investigative journalist Deborah Bonello, who reported on Fernandez Valencia extensively for Vice World News, described the gap precisely. The reason Fernandez Valencia had almost no public profile was not because her role was minor. It was because she did not fit the image. She was in her 60s. She was not glamorous. She did not resemble the bucona ideal that the media and the entertainment industry had decided was what a cartel woman looked like. She did not draw attention to herself. She wore black pants and a leopard print shirt when she was arrested, led down a quiet street by 2 female officers, and climbed calmly into a police truck. No drama, no footage that made global news. Emma Coronel's arrest at Dulles Airport in 2021 generated thousands of news stories worldwide. Fernandez Valencia's arrest in 2016 generated almost none. The show Narcos made El Chapo into a legend. It had no story for the 60-year-old woman who ran his distribution network and then helped put him away. __quote _3__. The show also had no story for the women who went even further, who became killers themselves, who commanded their own hit squads, and who died in police shootouts before they turned 22. That part of the cartel world existed too, and it is documented in full. Section 5. Female Sicarias, the hit woman. Reality. Narcos has no female hitmen. The women in the show are wives, lovers, informants, or casualties. None of them are assassins. None of them command kill squads. None of them die in a firefight with the Mexican army at 21 years old. The real cartel world produced exactly that. Maria Guadalupe Lopez Esquivel was born in Buenavista, Michoacán, and grew up in the town of Tepalcatepec. By all documented accounts, she was a good student in her younger years. She liked the TV show La Reina del Sur, a Spanish-language series about a female narco boss. In 2017, when she was around 18 years old, she moved to the municipality of Aguililla and joined the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, known as the CJNG, after starting a relationship with a man named Miguel Fernandez, known inside the cartel as LM2, who was the CJNG's plaza chief for the Tierra Caliente region of Michoacán. Within 2 years, she was a plaza boss herself. On October 14, 2019, Lopez Esquivel directly coordinated an ambush on a convoy of Michoacán State Police in Aguililla. 13 officers were killed, 9 more were wounded. Audio recordings obtained by Mexican authorities after the attack captured the voice of LM2 issuing orders to Lopez Esquivel, and her voice confirming the mission would be carried out as instructed. Documents found in cartel vehicles seized after the ambush confirmed she was responsible for paying the salaries of lookouts, known as halcones, working for her CJNG cell. She was also confirmed as a sicaria involved in extortion and kidnapping operations across the region. She had a Catrina tattoo on her thigh, the skeletal female figure associated with Mexico's Day of the Dead, which is where her alias came from. 3 months after the October ambush, on January 10, 2020, the Mexican Army, the National Guard, and Michoacán State Police moved on her location in La Bocanada, a community in the municipality of Tepalcatepec. There was a firefight. Lopez Esquivel was shot in the neck. Footage filmed by the military showed her on the ground, covered in blood, struggling to breathe. A soldier knelt beside her. The footage captured the soldier telling her to calm down, that the helicopter was coming, that she was going to be okay. She was airlifted from the scene. She died of blood loss before reaching the hospital. She was 21 years old. A morgue photograph of her Catrina thigh tattoo was used to officially confirm her identity. 6 male gunmen were captured in the same operation. Lopez Esquivel became a plaza boss by being connected to a powerful man. She rose because of that relationship. When she died in a firefight, alone on the ground, while the man who gave her orders, LM2, was reportedly arrested separately during the same raid, but survived. The case of Melissa Margarita Calderon Ojeda, known as La China, shows what a decade inside the cartel actually looks like for a woman who built her career without dying young. Calderon Ojeda was born on August 12, 1984. She started her criminal career with the Sinaloa cartel in 2005 when she was around 20 years old. Her first boyfriend, Eric Davalos von Borstel, brought her into the business. Over the following decade, she rose from ordinary hitwoman to leader of Las Fuerzas Especiales de los Damaso, the Special Forces enforcement arm of a Sinaloa cartel faction led by Damaso Lopez Núñez, a figure who had helped El Chapo escape from prison. She commanded a group that authorities said had around 300 members. She was linked to over 150 murders. Former DEA Chief of International Operations Mike Vigil told the San Antonio Express-News that she proved her willingness to kill people. Then, the cartel stripped her rank. A man called El Grande was released from prison and handed her position. El Grande also killed her boyfriend von Borstel for talking too much. In response, Calderon Ojeda formed her own breakaway organization with a new partner, a man called El Chino. Their group used red motorcycles and controlled territory in La Paz, Baja California Sur. They fought a brutal war against their former Sinaloa allies over trafficking routes, contributing to more than 133 deaths in the Baja Peninsula between July 2014 and her arrest in September 2015. Including 22 deaths in August 2015 alone, according to the Tijuana investigative news weekly, Zeta. Her documented method of operation included using female associates to lure targets. One documented case described how her associate Gabriela Hulzar Lopez, known as La Gabby, pretended to be a drunk woman stumbling in the street to get a target to stop his car. A second woman then approached and shot him twice. He died. La China's end came because El Chino, her own second-in-command and boyfriend, turned her in. He was arrested in June 2015, led authorities to clandestine graves holding 4 to 6 bodies buried at her direction in La Paz, and gave investigators a list of the police officers, soldiers, and officials on her payroll. On September 20, 2015, she was arrested at Cabo San Lucas International Airport as she tried to board a flight to Culiacan. No shots were fired. Her identity was confirmed by fingerprints, past mugshots, and her tattoos. In 2024, she was sentenced to 20 years in prison for qualified homicide. She remains incarcerated. The International Crisis Group, which conducted direct field interviews with active and former female cartel members across 4 cartels in 2022, documented why women like Lopez Esquivel and Calderon Ojeda were effective in these roles. Several women told researchers that being raised to go unnoticed, a product of how women are socialized in many parts of Mexico, made it easier not to draw attention. People let their guard down around women. Men who would never let a male assassin get close would let a woman approach. The gender expectation that women are not killers was, in practice, their operational advantage. Both women rose through relationships with men. Both had those relationships weaponized against them. One lost everything when her boss stripped her rank and killed her boyfriend. The other was betrayed by her own partner. Lopez Esquivel died at 21. Calderon Ojeda will spend 20 years in prison. The show made no room for either of them. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. While these women were wielding guns and commanding kill squads, the most famous cartel woman in the world was sitting in a courtroom in New York in designer clothes, saying nothing. Her story is documented in full, and it is more complicated than the show ever suggested. Section 6. Emma Coronel, the most documented narco wife on Earth, and what her case actually shows. Emma Coronel Aispuro was born on July 2, 1989, near San Francisco, California. She grew up on a ranch called La Angostura in the remote mountains of Canelas in the state of Durango. The ranch had no running water and no electricity. In a 2025 documentary on Oxygen called Married to El Chapo, Emma Coronel speaks. She said they had no television either, which is why she claims she did not know who Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was when she met him in 2007. She was 17 at the time. He was 50. He was a fugitive who had been on the run since escaping from a Mexican prison in 2001. He attended a local beauty pageant connected to the Coffee and Guava Festival in Canelas. Her father, Inés Coronel Barreras, had arranged for members of the Sinaloa cartel to attend the event. El Chapo saw her and, according to multiple documented accounts, told people around him she would be his wife. They married on July 2, 2007, her 18th birthday, in a symbolic ceremony at her family ranch. There was no civil union. There were musical bands, guards with military uniforms and automatic weapons, and 3 days of celebrations across Canelas. Her father was one of El Chapo's closest associates and was arrested on drug trafficking charges in 2013. 2 of her brothers were arrested between 2013 and 2015 on related charges. Her uncle, Ignacio Nacho Coronel, was a pioneer in methamphetamine trafficking for the Sinaloa cartel, who was killed by Mexican armed forces in Jalisco in 2010. Emma Coronel did not marry into the cartel world. She was born into it. What the show Narcos and the broader media made of her was something simpler and more flattering: a beautiful, loyal, silent wife. She sat through the entirety of El Chapo's trial in Brooklyn in 2018 and 2019, nearly every day for 3 months, dressed well, composed, sometimes with their twin daughters beside her. She did not flinch at testimony describing her husband's murders, his affairs, or decades of trafficking. She blew kisses at him across the courtroom. The press treated it as devotion. The DEA had agents inside the Sinaloa cartel who were watching what she was actually doing, which was carrying messages from El Chapo to cartel associates while he was behind bars, and giving orders after his 2014 arrest. According to U.S. Department of Justice court documents, from approximately 2011 through at least January 19, 2017, Coronel was a co-conspirator in the activities of the Sinaloa cartel. After El Chapo was captured by Mexican authorities in February 2014, she played a direct role in planning his escape from Altiplano Maximum Security Prison, which happened on July 11, 2015. She conducted planning meetings with co-conspirators. She coordinated the movement of drug money to finance the escape operation. She helped acquire property near the prison. She smuggled in a GPS watch disguised as food, which allowed those digging the tunnel to pinpoint El Chapo's exact cell location. The tunnel ran approximately 1 mile from that nearby property under the prison floor to directly beneath his shower. She also helped plan a second escape attempt after his recapture, which was aborted when he was extradited to the United States in January 2017. She crossed freely into and out of the United States during all of this. She appeared on the VH1 reality show Cartel Crew, where she sat on boats and discussed building a brand from her husband's criminal legacy. She launched a clothing line called El Chapo Guzman JG LLC with one of El Chapo's other daughters. She had millions of social media followers. Nobody arrested her. On February 22, 2021, she arrived at Dulles International Airport in Virginia and was taken into custody. The FBI arrest warrant cited evidence of her shuttling messages from El Chapo to cartel associates, her role in the 2015 escape, and her involvement in his second escape plot. She was charged with conspiracy to distribute heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, and marijuana, money laundering conspiracy, and violating the Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act. On June 10, 2021, she pleaded guilty to all 3 counts in federal court in Washington. She forfeited $1,499,970 to the government. On November 30, 2021, Judge Rudolph Contreras sentenced her to 36 months in prison, followed by 4 years of supervised release. Prosecutors had asked for 4 years. The judge acknowledged she was a teenager when she married El Chapo and noted that her actual role was a small piece of a much larger organization. The prosecution's own statement described her as a cog in a very large wheel, not a leader or manager. She was released from federal custody in September 2023 after serving less than 2 years. She is a dual U.S.-Mexican citizen and cannot be deported. She now lives in the United States. In the 2025 Oxygen documentary, she said she lives one day at a time, is focused on new projects and modeling work. She walked the runway at Milan Fashion Week, and that her parents are helping support her twin daughters. She said her marriage now provokes only sadness in her. She said she accepted her guilt and is good with that. What her case actually shows is this. She grew up surrounded by cartel men, was targeted by one of the most powerful drug lords in history at 17, married him at 18, spent over a decade operating as a go-between and logistics coordinator for a criminal organization that shipped hundreds of tons of drugs into the United States, helped break her husband out of a maximum security prison, sat calmly through a trial where his crimes were laid out in full, appeared on a reality television show while under federal investigation, and served 22 months in prison for all of it. The show Narcos made the cartel world look like the kind of place a sharp person could navigate and survive. Emma Coronel is one of the only women connected to that world who actually did, and the price she paid was still almost everything. Quote _5 ___. The next section goes to the part of the cartel world that no television show has ever fully documented. The industrial-scale trafficking of women who had no connection to cartels at all, no choice in the matter, and no way out. Section 7. The sex trafficking pipeline Narcos never shows. Narcos is a show about moving drugs. It has almost nothing to say about the other business that grew alongside the drug trade, financed by the same organizations, run through the same networks, using the same violence. That business is the trafficking of women, and the documented scale of it in Mexico is something television has never come close to showing. Human trafficking is the third largest illegal activity in Mexico, behind the gun trade and the drug trade. Santiago Nieto, Mexico's former head of financial intelligence, stated publicly that many of the country's most powerful cartels diversified into trafficking specifically when their core drug operations came under pressure. The logic was explained plainly by Teresa Ulloa, director of the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women and Girls in Latin America and the Caribbean, in an interview with Time magazine. Drugs can only be sold once, but women can be sold again and again and again. Ulloa said organized crime is involved in approximately 70% of sex trafficking cases in Mexico. The cartels that appear throughout Narcos, the Guadalajara Cartel, the Sinaloa Cartel, the Gulf Cartel, and the Zetas, are all documented participants in this industry. A Salvadoran single mother was traveling through Veracruz state by train in 2009, hoping to reach the United States to support her children. Strange men transferred her group of migrants to Zeta cartel gunmen. She was taken to a house. During her 3-month captivity, dozens of women passed through the same location. Zeta members inspected the new female arrivals. Some were raped inside the house. Others were taken to hotel rooms and returned crying and bruised. One night in early 2009, a gunman let the Salvadoran woman go, along with a Guatemalan woman whose uncle had traded her to the Zetas for his own freedom. The Salvadoran mother testified about what happened to her before Mexican legislators who were pushing for new human trafficking laws. This case was documented by the Washington Post in 2011. In the same reporting, Time magazine documented testimony given to Mexican Congresswoman Rosy Orozco by another El Salvador woman who described being kidnapped by the Zetas, repeatedly raped, and forced to cook, clean, and wash bloody clothes and machetes. Around the same period, a mother in Oaxaca state found the body of her daughter after a 2-year search. Her daughter had been held by a Zeta cell, repeatedly raped, and decapitated. The academic research published in the Mexican journal Cielo, drawing on documented testimonies from trafficking survivors, describes how the kidnapping pipeline operated. Women traveling on buses or trains were subdued by armed men in public spaces. Others were taken directly from migrant smugglers. In some cases, those smugglers were killed for attempting to defend the women they were transporting. Once taken, the process moved in 3 documented stages: abduction, ransom collection, and sexual slavery. The research documents something that goes further than what most people understand when they hear the words sex trafficking. Women who survived long enough inside cartel-run operations were often forced to participate in the operation itself. They were made to recruit other women from their home countries using deception, to sell drugs, to act as informants, or to seduce and gather intelligence on members of rival cartels. One documented testimony from a woman identified as Elvia described being ordered to develop a relationship with a rival cartel leader over 3 months, gaining his trust and learning the details of his schedule, until she was able to report back the information needed to ambush and kill him.
She was not told what the information would be used for until it was too late. The CLO research describes the exploitation reaching such intensity that the life expectancy of women held in these operations was deliberately ignored by the cartels running them. The research states directly that it was more profitable to replace a woman who died than to reduce the level of exploitation to keep her alive. The U.S. State Department's annual Trafficking in Persons report has flagged Mexico in every reporting period for failures in victim identification, prosecution, and protection. The 2024 report documented that organized criminal groups, including the Sinaloa Cartel, the CJNG, and the Zetas successor groups, control most of the smuggling routes through which victims are moved, and use fraudulent job advertisements, kidnapping, torture, threats of murder, blackmail, and debt bondage to coerce women into trafficking. The report also documented that some Mexican government officials facilitated or participated in trafficking crimes directly, extorting migrants, colluding with criminal groups to facilitate kidnappings, and taking identification documents from migrants to make escape harder. NBC News reported in 2022 that the Gulf Cartel, operating in Tamaulipas state along the Texas border, had turned sexual violence into a systematic weapon against migrants in encampments waiting for U.S. immigration appointments. Women in those camps described being grabbed from the street, blindfolded, driven to locations, and raped, with their captors filming the violence to send to their families as proof of kidnapping for ransom purposes. 3 separate women described nearly identical experiences to NBC News reporters. The UNODC, the United Nations Drugs and Crime Office, estimates that at least 25% of trafficking victims in Mexico are migrants. Mario Cordero Vejar, head of the UNODC's Program on Crime and Drugs, told NBC News in 2022 that the true scale is almost certainly higher because the vast majority of cases are never reported. The Mexican government officially identified 744 trafficking victims in 2021. Experts working in the field say that number represents a tiny fraction of what is actually happening. In 2021, the anti-trafficking organization A21 identified Mexico as the country with the 3rd highest rate of child trafficking in the world, behind only Thailand and Cambodia. Narcos gave its audience 3 seasons of carefully constructed drama about drug routes, cartel politics, and the men who ran those operations. The women documented in this section were traveling through the same territory those cartels controlled. They were not characters in any one story. They were inventory. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The numbers behind what is happening to women across Mexico's cartel territories do not exist only in trafficking data. They exist in a different set of statistics entirely, the femicide numbers. And those numbers have been climbing for 3 decades with almost no accountability. Section 8. The femicide numbers. Behind the glamour. In 2022, 3,754 women and girls were murdered in Mexico. That works out to approximately 10 every single day. Of that total, only 947 were officially investigated as femicides, the legal category Mexico created in 2012 to describe the intentional killing of a woman because of her gender. Civil society organizations working on the ground believe the real femicide count is significantly higher, because state prosecutors regularly classify these killings as ordinary homicides to keep the official numbers down. That is what the country that produced the Sinaloa Cartel, the Zetas, the Gulf Cartel, and the Guadalajara Cartel looks like for women in a given year. The geographic overlap between where cartels are strongest and where women die at the highest rates is not a coincidence. The Wilson Center's 2023 policy brief confirmed that the states with the highest concentrations of female homicides are Guanajuato, Baja California, Estado de Mexico,
and Michoacán, the same states that top every ranking of overall homicide rates driven by cartel violence. Research published in peer-reviewed journals has statistically confirmed that femicide rates are growing as a distinct trend in Mexico, separate from general homicide patterns, and that the growth has been steady since data collection began in 2015. Between 2007 and 2021, the number of women reported as disappeared in Mexico increased by a factor of 15. In the 6 years prior to the Wilson Center's 2023 report, the number of disappeared women and girls tripled. Mexico has officially registered over 110,000 missing people in total. More than half of all female disappearances are concentrated in just 8 states, and every one of those 8 states carries an active gender violence alert, a federal designation that means local, state, and federal authorities are legally required to work together to prevent gendered violence. The alerts have largely failed to produce results. The femicide crisis in Mexico did not begin with the drug war that officially started in 2006. Its documented origins go back to 1993 in Ciudad Juárez. Ciudad Juárez sits directly on the border with El Paso, Texas. In 1993, the same year the murders began drawing attention, the Juárez drug cartel under Amado Carrillo Fuentes took control of the city's trafficking routes. Simultaneously, the implementation of NAFTA the following year in 1994 caused the maquiladora industry, foreign-owned assembly factories, to expand rapidly across the city. Tens of thousands of women from across Mexico migrated to Juárez for factory work. The jobs paid poverty wages. Maquiladora workers, as recently as 2017, were earning $4.50 per day. The factories were on the city's outskirts. Women traveled to and from them in the early morning and late at night, often alone. Since 1993, more than 2,500 women have been killed in Ciudad Juárez, according to estimates documented by the Align platform and multiple academic sources, though the real number is likely higher because many cases were never properly investigated. Amnesty International reported in 2005 that more than 370 young women and girls had been killed in Ciudad Juárez and Chihuahua City since 1993. The documented academic analysis of femicides from 1993 to 2013 found that these killings increased by 560% between the 1993 to 2007 period and the 2008 to 2012 period, the years when cartel wars in Juárez were at their most intense. During the peak violence years of 2008 to 2012, Chihuahua State accounted for 18.6% of all violent deaths in Mexico, with Juárez alone representing 61% of those Chihuahua deaths. A common pattern emerged early in the Juárez killings and was documented across multiple investigations. Young working-class women, many of them maquiladora employees or students, slim with dark hair, were abducted from public spaces. Their bodies were found in empty lots, drainage ditches, and desert fields on the city's outskirts. Many showed evidence of rape and torture. Many were mutilated. The majority of cases were never solved. When families reported daughters missing to authorities, they were routinely dismissed. One documented case involved Paloma Angelica Escobar Ledesma, a 16-year-old student and maquiladora worker who disappeared in March 2002. When her mother went to the authorities, a state attorney told her that Paloma was just out partying. By the time the attorney said those words, Paloma was already dead. Her body was found later. Her mother did not believe the subsequent confession obtained by authorities because it came after torture. Women's activist Vicky Caraveo, who had been fighting femicide in Juárez since 1993, said in an interview given 20 years later that she had expected substantial change. It had not come. The disappearances, she said, had never stopped. In Mexico, most femicides are not committed with firearms. Only 21% involve guns. The majority are carried out by strangulation, suffocation, drowning, stabbing, and other methods requiring close physical contact, which researchers note reflects the intimate domestic nature of most perpetrator-victim relationships in these cases. This is not cartel warfare in the conventional sense. It is something that happens inside homes and relationships, normalized and enabled by a justice system that, in 2024, failed to prosecute at least 92% of all crimes committed in Mexico. Mexican prosecutors have opened 1.7 million criminal investigations over 8 years for beatings, burns, strangulation, injuries with knives and firearms against women. Out of those 1.7 million investigations, only 781 were initiated as attempted femicide. That gap between the documented violence and the formal legal response to it is the clearest measure of where women stand in the country that produced the cartel world Narcos glamorized. The women who have done the most to document and fight this reality are not fictional characters. They are journalists and activists, many of whom have paid for that work with their lives. And their stories are the part of the cartel world that no television show has ever found a way to tell. Section 9. The journalists and activists who document this and die for it. On March 23, 2017, Miroslava Breach was sitting in her truck outside her home in Chihuahua City, waiting to drive her son Carlos to school. A gunman approached and shot her 8 times in the head. She died at the scene. At the crime scene, the killer left a handwritten note. It read, "For being a loudmouth." Miroslava Breach was 54 years old. She had spent decades as an investigative correspondent for La Jornada and Norte de Ciudad Juárez, reporting on human rights violations, organized crime, forced disappearances, and the links between drug cartels and political candidates across Chihuahua State. In March 2016, she had published a piece exposing cartel infiltration into mayoral candidate lists in mountain towns across Chihuahua. That reporting cost the cartel-linked candidate an election. After it was published, she began receiving death threats. Mexican state authorities later told her she had not formally reported those threats, despite also acknowledging she had received them 2 years before her murder. The criminal organization identified as responsible was Los Salazares, a division of Gente Nueva, which is an armed wing of the Sinaloa cartel. The motive, authorities concluded, was revenge for her journalism exposing their political operations. 53 days later, on May 15, 2017, Javier Valdez, a reporter who covered organized crime in Sinaloa for the weekly newspaper Rio Doce, which he had co-founded, walked out of his office in Culiacan into the street. 2 men pulled him from his car. A third drove the car away and abandoned it down the road. Valdez was shot dead in the street in front of his own newspaper building. He was 50 years old. Just days before his death, Valdez had responded publicly to Miroslava Breach's murder. He wrote that journalists should be killed if that was the price for reporting on the hell Mexico had become, and called for no silence. He had known the risk he was taking by continuing to report. He kept reporting anyway. The man convicted of participating in Valdez's murder was sentenced to 32 years in prison in 2021. The alleged mastermind, a figure known as Mini Lick, the son of a senior Sinaloa cartel boss, surrendered to U.S. authorities the same year Valdez was killed on a different matter. And whether he was ever fully tried for the journalist's death remained unresolved for years afterward. These 2 murders did not happen in a vacuum. They are part of a documented pattern that the Committee to Protect Journalists has tracked since 1992. More than 120 journalists have been murdered in Mexico since 2000. Mexico is considered the most dangerous country for journalists in the Western Hemisphere. More than 95% of those murders remain in impunity. No conviction,
no arrest, no accountability. The Committee to Protect Journalists found that in at least 10 documented cases, government or military officials were the suspected perpetrators, not cartels. Mexican journalists themselves have said publicly that they fear the government more than they fear the cartels. The women who document femicide specifically face a compounding threat. They are exposing a crisis that is directly connected to organized crime in some cases and to corrupt government officials in others, and often to both at the same time. Norma Andrade's daughter, Lilia Alejandra Garcia Andrade, was 17 years old when she was abducted, raped, tortured, and murdered in Ciudad Juarez on February 14, 2001. Norma Andrade became one of the co-founders of Nuestras Hijas de Regreso a Casa, which translates as May Our Daughters Return Home, a nonprofit organization of mothers whose daughters were victims of femicide in Chihuahua State. She began traveling across Mexico and internationally to tell her daughter's story and demand accountability from the government. On December 2, 2011, Norma Andrade was leaving work in Ciudad Juarez when unknown men shot her 5 times. She sustained injuries to her torso, right shoulder, and right hand. She survived. Investigation later revealed that unknown callers had contacted her school that same morning, asking what time she arrived and whether she would come to work in the afternoon. She was released from hospital and placed under 24-hour protection. On February 3, 2012, in Mexico City, she left her residence to walk her granddaughter to school. A man approached her and slashed her face with a knife. She received treatment for a 2-inch laceration in her cheek. He fled. His identity was never established. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights later ruled in a case connected to Norma Andrade's family that Mexico failed to prevent, investigate, and punish gender-based violence in Juarez, and failed to protect Andrade herself, despite her documented status as a human rights defender facing active threats. The court found that investigations into her daughter's murder were marked by serious deficiencies, including delays, loss of evidence, and institutional tolerance of impunity. As of 2024, Norma Andrade had spoken with 4 Mexican presidents, 5 governors, 12 prosecutors, and countless public officials. Her daughter's killers have never been convicted. One DNA-identified suspect, linked by investigators to at least 5 femicide cases and identified as a relative of a senior official, has been named since 2010 and has still not been arrested. In a 2024 interview, Andrade said that even as violence against women increases in Mexico, its visibility is going down. She said the boom in organized crime has caused people to flee the country and has made what is happening to women invisible. She said her granddaughter describes women in Mexico as worth a peanut, meaning disposable. These are the women the cartel world produces that no television show has ever built a season around. Not the ones who ran the money, not the ones who carried messages out of prison, not the ones who commanded hit squads. The ones who watched their daughters be taken and spent the rest of their lives through shootings, stabbings, threats, and 2 decades of silence from a state that identified the killer and made no arrest, refusing to let it be erased. The final section brings together everything documented across these 9 sections and measures it against what the show gave its audience, because the gap between those 2 things is the actual story. Section 10. The Narcos body count that never made the show. When the 3rd season of Narcos Mexico finished streaming in the week of November 8th through 14th, 2021, Netflix reported it had been watched for 50.3 million hours. That made it the most-watched English-language series on the platform globally that week, beating Squid Game. In a separate Nielsen measurement covering the same week, the show logged 769 million minutes of viewing in the United States alone, nearly 100 million more than its closest competition. At various points in its run,
The Narcos franchise was ranked by the analytics company Parrot Analytics as the single most popular show on Netflix globally, ahead of Stranger Things and every other series on the platform. Those numbers matter because they represent the scale of the picture Narcos built in the minds of its global audience. Tens of millions of people in countries that had no other entry point into the cartel world learned what they know about it from that show. They learned the names, the power structures, the geography, the violence, and, critically, the women. What this show gave them was this: wives who stood quietly in courtrooms, girlfriends used as status symbols, the occasional woman who appeared briefly and was killed to advance a male character's story. The Guadalupe Lea Serrano of the show existed to motivate her husband. The cartel world the show depicted had women at its edges, orbiting the men who actually mattered. Academic research published in peer-reviewed journals examining the representation of women in both El Chapo and Narcos Mexico found that both shows portray women primarily as trophy figures or marginal characters lacking agency. The research noted that empowered female characters who did appear, including Enadina Arellano Felix, the documented financial head of the Tijuana cartel who took over operations after her brothers were arrested and who has never ordered an assassination, appeared minimally and were repeatedly undermined by the show's framing. The study concluded that the shows were directed and produced primarily by men and reflected a predominantly masculine viewpoint that shaped what the female characters were allowed to be. The gap between that portrayal and the documented reality is the size of 9 sections worth of verified evidence. The documented reality is this: women in the cartel world are not at the edges. They die at the center of it, for reasons that have nothing to do with choices they made. Guadalupe Lea Serrano was decapitated, and her 5-year-old son and 4-year-old daughter were thrown off a bridge in Venezuela because of who her husband was. Paulina Ramirez Garcia was 25 years old and died over 22 days in a hospital with her organs perforated, because a television show and a social media culture told her the narco body was the body worth having. Guadalupe Fernandez Valencia spent 30 years in the drug business, rose to become the highest-ranking female operative in the Sinaloa cartel, was the only woman on the indictment that sent El Chapo to prison for life, and has a public profile so thin that most people who watched every episode of Narcos Mexico have never heard her name. Maria Guadalupe Lopez Esquivel was 21 years old when she bled out from a bullet wound to the neck in a helicopter over Michoacán state. The soldier beside her told her to calm down, that she was going to be okay. She did not make it to the hospital. She had been a plaza boss for the CJNG for 2 years. The show had no story for her. Melissa Margarita Calderon Ojeda spent a decade as one of the most feared assassin squad leaders in Baja California Sur, was linked to over 150 murders, built her own cartel after being stripped of her rank, and was eventually arrested at an airport when her own boyfriend turned her in to save himself. Her sentence was 20 years. She spent 9 years in legal proceedings. The show had no story for her either. The women who were trafficked, pulled off buses in Veracruz by Zeta gunmen, held in houses in Tamaulipas where dozens of other women cycled through during 3-month periods of captivity, exploited in cities along routes the show spent 3 seasons dramatizing, did not appear. The girls aged 8 to 17 taken from indigenous communities in Chiapas and Oaxaca, transported north for sexual exploitation by CJNG and Sinaloa operatives. The U.S. State Department documenting all of it in annual reports. They did not appear. The 3,754 women murdered in Mexico in 2022, 10 per day, every day, in the same states where the cartels the show dramatized operate, did not appear. The 50,000 women murdered in Mexico since 2001, with an impunity rate exceeding 95%,
did not appear. Norma Andrade, who was shot 5 times and stabbed in the face across 2 separate attacks in 2 years because she kept demanding justice for her murdered daughter, did not appear. Miroslava Breach, who was shot 8 times outside her home in front of her son because she wrote about cartel infiltration into municipal elections, did not appear. One of the show's own location scouts, a man named Carlos Muñoz Portal, was found murdered with multiple gunshot wounds in his car on a dirt road in central Mexico in September 2017, while the show was still in production.
Authorities noted the possibility of cartel involvement. The people who worked on the show were in the same world they were dramatizing. They knew, at some level, what proximity to it actually cost. The show told audiences that the cartel world is a world of powerful men making consequential decisions. The documented record shows it is also a world that produces dead women in hospital beds, in desert fields, in bridges over rivers in Venezuela, in clandestine clinics in Sinaloa, in encampments along the Texas border, in shallow graves in Oaxaca, and in the files of human rights organizations that count them because no government is doing it reliably enough. Narcos was watched for 50.3 million hours in a single week. The women in this video were not watched at all. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.